The small, dimly lit steakhouse in Carmel by the Sea was packed as usual. A new waitress, Jessica, had just started her shift, eager to make an impression. She had worked in plenty of restaurants before, and to her this was just another job, one that didn't pay enough and brought in too many demanding customers. As she wiped down a table, a tall, older man with piercing eyes and a rugged demeanor walked in. He wore a simple jacket and jeans, blending in with the other patrons. Jessica barely glanced at him as he took a seat in her section. She sighed and walked over with her notepad. "What can I get you?" she asked, her tone flat. The man smiled. "I'll have the ribeye, medium rare, with a baked potato." Jessica scribbled it down and looked up. "You sure you don't want a softer cut? The ribeye's got a little chew to it. Might be tough for someone your age." She smirked slightly, unaware of the hush that fell around nearby tables. A couple at the next booth exchanged wide-eyed glances. The bartender paused mid-pour, but the man simply chuckled. "I think I can handle it," he said, his voice smooth yet firm. Jessica shrugged and walked away. The kitchen staff, having overheard, peeked out to get a look at her. One of the cooks whispered, "She doesn't know, does she?" About 15 minutes later, Jessica returned with the steak, setting it down with a careless thud. "There, you go. Hope it's not too tough," she quipped before turning on her heel. The man took his time eating, savoring each bite. Once he was done, he motioned for the check. Jessica dropped it on the table, not even making eye contact. When he reached for his wallet, he pulled out something else instead, a card. He held it up and gave her a knowing smile. "You might want to be a little more careful who you insult around here," he said. Jessica frowned, picking up the card. Her face drained of color as she read the name, Clint Eastwood, owner. Her mouth went dry. "Wait, you own this place?" she stammered. He nodded. "Yep, and I've been coming here for years." He leaned in slightly. "Now, normally, I'd say this was just a rough first impression, but you've got quite the attitude. Something tells me you're not exactly enjoying your job." Jessica swallowed hard. The entire restaurant was dead silent, waiting for what would happen next. I didn't mean any offense, sir. He raised a hand, cutting her off, with a small smile. "Relax, kid. I've been insulted worse in my time. But if you're gonna work in a place like this, you might want to treat customers with a little more respect. You never know who you're talking to." Jessica nodded, quickly. "I understand. I'll do better." Clint placed a $100 bill on the table and stood up. "Good. And don't worry, I'm not firing you." Jessica exhaled in relief. "But," he added as he walked toward the door, "if you serve me again, maybe skip the age jokes." The entire restaurant burst into laughter as Clint Eastwood strolled out, leaving Jessica standing there still in shock. Jessica stood frozen, the laughter around her fading into a dull hum in her ears. She had just insulted Clint Eastwood, and lived to tell the tale. More importantly, she still had her job. The bartender, Tony, sauntered over, shaking his head. "Damn, Jess. Of all the people to mouth off to, you had to pick the guy who signs the checks?" Jessica groaned, rubbing her temples. "How was I supposed to know? He looked like any other old guy who's picky about his steak." Tony chuckled. "Yeah, except this old guy is a Hollywood legend and owns this joint." The rest of the night passed with lingering stares and a few whispered jokes from co-workers. By the time she clocked out, Jessica had gone from mortified to determined. She wasn't about to be the waitress who got on Clint Eastwood's bad side. The next evening, she walked into work with a fresh attitude, eager to prove herself. She went out of her way to be polite to customers, even the ones who got on her nerves. No eye rolls, no sarcasm, just a professional, friendly demeanor. A few nights later, just as the dinner rush picked up, the front door swung open, and in strolled Clint Eastwood again. This time, Jessica spotted him immediately. Her stomach did a nervous flip, but she squared her shoulders and approached with a composed smile. "Welcome back, sir," she said, her voice smooth and respectful. "Would you like your usual?" Clint studied her for a moment, then grinned. "You learn quick?" Jessica smirked. "I try." He nodded approvingly. Ribeye, medium rare, and let's see if it's still tough for me. She chuckled and jotted it down. I have a feeling you'll handle it just fine. Throughout his meal, Jessica made sure everything was perfect. She refilled his water before he asked, checked in just enough without hovering, and when it was time for the check, she placed it gently on the table. Clint glanced at her, amusement twinkling in his sharp eyes. Now that's more like it. Jessica grinned. I guess you were right. You never know who you're talking to. He pulled out his wallet, leaving behind another $100 bill, along with a note scribbled on the receipt. Good job, kid. Keep this up and you'll do just fine. Jessica exhaled, shaking her head with a small smile. She had started the week insulting a Hollywood icon. Now she had his respect. Not a bad turnaround. As Jessica pocketed the tip and the note, a sense of pride settled over her. She had managed to redeem herself, and more importantly, she had earned the approval of Clint Eastwood himself. Word of her infamous first encounter with the restaurant's owner had spread beyond just her co-workers. Regular customers started coming in, some playfully asking, "So Jess insulted any other celebrities lately?" She took it in stride, laughing it off while making sure every guest got the kind of service that would make Clint proud. One evening, about a week later, as she was clearing a table, she felt a familiar presence. Looking up, she saw Clint walking in, not alone this time. He was accompanied by two other men, both older but carrying themselves with the same quiet confidence. Jessica quickly recognized one of them, Morgan Freeman. Her stomach nearly dropped. Oh, come on. Tony, the bartender, let out a low whistle. Well, looks like the boss brought backup. Jessica took a steadying breath and approached the table with practiced ease. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to your restaurant, she said with a grin, looking at Clint. He smirked. Thought I'd bring some friends along. Wanted to see if your service was consistently good or just for me. Morgan Freeman chuckled, his deep voice unmistakable. I hear you've got a reputation, young lady. Jessica groaned internally, but smiled. I'm guessing you got the Jessica insulted Clint Eastwood special edition story? Clint leaned back in his chair. Oh yeah, I made sure he heard all about it. Jessica sighed but kept her composure. Well, I promise you, Mr. Freeman, I've learned my lesson. Morgan laughed. That's good to hear. I'll take a ribeye as well, medium rare. Jessica nodded, turning to the third guest whom she hadn't recognized yet. And for you, sir? The man smiled. Same for me. Jessica jotted it down, then glanced at Clint. 3 ribeyes, medium rare. No soft steaks for anyone? Clint gave her a knowing look. Nice try, she grinned, and walked away feeling a little more at ease. As the night went on, she couldn't help but glance over at their table. The 3 men sat talking, laughing, completely at home. It wasn't every day you saw Clint Eastwood, Morgan Freeman, and a mystery friend having dinner like old pals. When she finally brought the check over, Clint handed her a new note, scribbled, on a napkin this time. You're doing great, kid, but don't think I won't test you again. Jessica smiled as she picked up the empty plates. I'll be ready. As the 3 men walked out, Tony shook his head. You know, Jess, you might just be the only person in history who insulted Clint Eastwood and turned it into a job perk. Jessica laughed, slipping the napkin into her apron pocket. What can I say? Some people pay for networking events. I just make bad first impressions. Over the next few weeks, Jessica found herself adjusting to a strange new reality. Clint Eastwood was now a semi-regular at the restaurant, and she had somehow become his unofficial go-to waitress. It wasn't that he requested her specifically, but every time he walked in, he'd glance her way with that knowing smirk, and the other servers would just step aside. Your table, Jess, Tony would say with a chuckle, shaking his head as he poured drinks behind the bar. And she didn't mind. In fact, she kinda liked it. Clint never made a big deal out of anything, never treated her differently than before, except for the occasional teasing remark whenever she brought his steak. Still worried this might be too tough for me? He'd ask, raising an eyebrow, and she'd fire back with a grin. I figured I'd check. You never know when old age might kick in. His low chuckle was always her cue that she'd passed whatever silent test he set for her that night. 1. Evening, as the dinner rush wound down, Clint showed up again, but this time something was different. Instead of taking his usual seat in her section, he lingered by the bar, chatting with Tony. Jessica stole a few glances as she wiped down a nearby table, trying to listen in without making it obvious. After a few minutes, Clint motioned her over. Jessica hesitated for half a second before walking up. "Everything okay, Mr. Eastwood?" He gave her a mock frown. "You're back to Mr. Eastwood now? Thought we were past that." She smirked. "Fair enough, Clint." Tony chuckled and leaned on the counter. "Your lucky day, Jess. Boss has a proposition for you." Jessica blinked. "Boss?" Clint shrugged. "I own this place, don't I?" Her heart picked up speed. What kind of proposition?" Clint leaned in slightly, resting an elbow on the bar. "Ever thought about doing something more than waiting tables?" Jessica swallowed. "I mean, yeah, eventually. But why do I feel like you've already got something in mind?" Clint nodded. "You've got personality, kid. Sharp wit, quick, on your feet. Reminds me of some of the best people I've worked with. And you've learned fast. You know how to handle customers, even the cranky ones like me." Jessica folded her arms, raising an eyebrow. "Where are you going with this?" Clint smirked. "I need someone to help run the place. Not just waiting tables, but really running it. Managing staff, handling orders, making sure everything stays top-notch." Jessica's breath caught. "You're offering me a promotion?" Clint nodded. "Assistant manager for starters. If you don't mess it up, who knows? Maybe one day you'll be running the whole show." Jessica stood there stunned. A few weeks ago she was this close to getting fired for insulting the owner, and now he was offering her a real future in the place? She swallowed hard. "Are you serious?" Clint leaned back, that signature half-smile still in place. "I don't make offers I don't mean." "So, what do you say?" Jessica didn't even have to think. She grinned, stuck out her hand, and shook his firmly. "I say, you've got yourself an assistant manager." Clint nodded in approval. "Good. Just remember, no age jokes in the employee meetings." Jessica laughed. "No promises, boss." Jessica settled into her new role faster than she expected. At first, the transition from waitress to assistant manager was overwhelming. Scheduling shifts, handling inventory, and dealing with staff issues required a whole new level of patience. But if she had learned anything from Clint Eastwood, it was that confidence and composure were everything. And Clint? He didn't micromanage. He'd drop in every now and then, order his usual ribeye, and observe. He'd offer advice here and there, but mostly he let her figure things out. One evening, a rowdy group of customers was giving the servers a hard time, snapping their fingers for attention, sending food back for no reason, and making crude jokes. Jessica noticed one of the newer waitresses, Emily, near tears after dealing with them. Without hesitation, Jessica marched over to the table, arms crossed. "Gentlemen, is there a problem?" One of the men, a guy in his 50s with a gold watch and too much cologne, smirked. "Yeah, the service here is terrible." Jessica gave him a polite but firm smile. "That's funny because everyone else seems to be having a great time." She leaned in slightly. "So, I'm going to ask, are you actually unhappy with the food and service, or are you just enjoying making my staff uncomfortable?" The man's smirk faltered. "We're just having some fun." "Great," Jessica said, still smiling. "Then you won't mind keeping it respectful. Otherwise, I can have Tony over there walk you out, and trust me, he's been dying to throw someone out tonight." She gestured toward the bar, where Tony cracked his knuckles for effect. The men muttered among themselves, but they backed down, finishing their meal without further issue. Jessica turned to walk away and froze when she spotted Clint watching from his usual table. He had seen the entire thing. For a moment, she braced herself for criticism. Maybe she had been too bold, too confrontational. But then Clint gave a slow, approving nod. When she later went to clear his table, she found another handwritten note, tucked under his plate. "You handled that like a pro. You're not just running this place, you're owning it. Proud of you, kid. Jessica swallowed the lump in her throat. She had gone from an impatient waitress with a bad attitude to earning the respect of Clint freaking Eastwood. As she pocketed the note, she smirked to herself. Not bad for someone who almost got fired. Weeks turned into months, and Jessica fully embraced her new role as assistant manager. She wasn't just running the restaurant, she was shaping it, making small but meaningful changes that improved workflow and boosted morale. The staff respected her, customers liked her, and even Tony admitted, "You're better at this than I ever would have guessed." But there was one thing she never quite got used to: Clint Eastwood showing up unannounced, just watching. He never interfered, never told her what to do. He would just sit back in his usual booth, nursing a glass of whiskey and observing everything. It was both intimidating and oddly reassuring. One particularly busy Friday night, the restaurant was at full capacity when a problem arose. The chef, Luis, stormed out of the kitchen, fuming. "I'm done," he announced loudly. "I can't work with that idiot anymore." Jessica rushed over, pulling him aside. "Luis, what's going on?" Luis pointed angrily toward the kitchen. "That new line cook? He just ruined 2 steaks, and when I told him to focus, he rolled his eyes at me. I can't work with disrespect." Jessica sighed. Kitchen tension was normal, but a chef walking out in the middle of a rush? That was a disaster. "Look, I'll handle it," she promised, glancing over her shoulder to see Clint still sitting at his booth, sipping his drink. He wasn't saying a word, but he was definitely watching. Taking a deep breath, Jessica pushed through the kitchen doors. The line cook, a young guy named Ryan, was muttering under his breath as he flipped a steak. "Hey, Ryan," she said, keeping her tone calm but firm. "What's going on?" Ryan shrugged. "Luis is overreacting. It's just a couple of steaks." Jessica narrowed her eyes. "It's not just a couple of steaks, it's time, it's money, and most importantly, it's respect. Luis has been cooking longer than you've been alive. If he's telling you something, maybe listen." Ryan scoffed. "What, so I'm just supposed to take his crap?" Jessica took a step closer. "No, you're supposed to learn. You want to stay here? Then prove you deserve to." For a moment, Ryan hesitated. Then, with a reluctant nod, he went back to work, this time actually listening when Luis gave instructions. Crisis averted. As Jessica stepped back onto the floor, she exhaled in relief until she spotted Clint, motioning for her to come over. She approached his table, half expecting some cryptic remark about how she could have handled things differently. Instead, he looked up at her with that same unreadable expression and simply said, "You remind me of myself when I was younger." Jessica blinked. "Wait, what?" Clint chuckled. "You stand your ground, but you don't let your ego get in the way. That's a rare thing." Jessica felt her cheeks flush. Coming from him, that was probably the highest compliment possible. He took another sip of his whiskey before setting the glass down. "I wasn't sure about you at first. Figured you'd either get yourself fired or quit, but you stuck around." She smirked. "Well, I had a good reason to." Clint raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Jessica shrugged. "You told me." "I never know who I'm talking to. Turns out that includes myself." For the first time, Clint genuinely laughed, a low, amused chuckle. He pulled out his wallet, left another generous tip, and stood up. "Keep it up, kid. You've got a future. Here." As he walked out, Jessica watched him go, shaking her head in disbelief. She had come a long way from being the waitress who insulted Clint Eastwood. Now she was his right hand in his own restaurant. And something told her this was just the beginning. Months passed, and Jessica grew into her role more than she ever expected. What started as an unexpected promotion had turned into something bigger. She wasn't just running the restaurant, she was shaping it. She built a solid team, improved efficiency, and even revamped the menu with Luis, bringing in fresh ideas that customers loved. The regulars noticed, the staff noticed, and most importantly, Clint noticed. His visits became less frequent, but when he did show up, he'd still watch her like a silent judge, sipping his whiskey and taking in the atmosphere. But Jessica had learned by now, if he had a problem, he'd say so. The fact that he mostly just sat back and observed, that meant he was pleased. One evening, just as the dinner rush was slowing down, Clint strolled in. This time, not alone. Jessica recognized the man beside him immediately. Bradley Cooper. She almost dropped the notepad in her hand. Tony, the bartender, let out a low whistle. Jesus, Jess, first Morgan Freeman, now this. What's next? Tom Hanks asking for a burger? Jessica shook her head and forced herself to stay calm as she approached the table. Clint, good to see you, she said smoothly, before glancing at Bradley Cooper with a polite smile. Welcome to the best restaurant in town. Bradley chuckled. That's what I hear. Apparently this place has a legend running it. Jessica blinked. Oh, Luis is definitely the best chef in town. Bradley smirked. I was actually talking about you. Jessica shot Clint a look, but he just shrugged. I tell people when someone impresses me, he said simply. Figured Bradley should meet the sharpest person in this place. Jessica cleared her throat, unsure how to respond to that. Clint Eastwood was talking about her like she was the real star of the place. Bradley grinned. So what's your story? Clint says you gave him a hard time the first time you met. Jessica sighed dramatically. Oh great, he's still telling people that story? Clint smirked. It's a good one. Jessica chuckled and turned to Bradley. Long story short, I made a terrible first impression, somehow didn't get fired, and now I run the place. Bradley nodded. Sounds like a movie. Jessica laughed. Let me guess, you want to direct it? He raised his hands in defense. Hey, I just got here. But if Clint's still talking about you, then you must be something special. Jessica didn't know what to say. Clint Eastwood, the legend himself, had taken her story and shared it with someone like Bradley Cooper. She had spent so much time proving herself, fighting to be more than just a waitress, and now she had done it. She was more than just a good employee. She was someone Clint Eastwood respected. As she turned to grab their drinks, she couldn't help but grin to herself. She had insulted Clint Eastwood once, and somehow it had turned into the best thing that had ever happened to her.